Welcome to Code Your English, the home to learn and grow fast.
Hello, and welcome back to Code Your English, the channel where we use powerful, real, and helpful life-changing topics to help you think, feel, and communicate in English at the highest level. I am genuinely glad you're here today. Whether you're listening on your commute, on a walk, at your desk with a cup of coffee, or, and I say this without judgment, lying in bed trying to persuade yourself to get up and start the day, welcome. Wherever you are, this episode is for you. My name is Jason, and today we're going to explore one of the most universal human experiences that exists, something every single person listening right now has experienced, probably just today, maybe in the last hour, possibly in the last 5 minutes. We are going to talk about procrastination, but not in the way you might expect. We are not going to give you a 10-step productivity system. We are not going to tell you to wake up at 5 in the morning. We are not going to shame you for the things you haven't done yet. Instead, we are going to ask why. Why does the brain procrastinate? What is it actually trying to do when it avoids, delays, and escapes? What emotions are hiding beneath the surface of all that delay? And what might it feel like to build a genuinely kinder, more honest relationship with your own mind? These are big questions. Questions worth taking the time to explore. Slowly, carefully, and thoughtfully. If this is your first time listening to Code Your English, welcome to the family. This podcast is designed for advanced learners who want to do more than study grammar. We engage with real ideas, sophisticated vocabulary, and the kind of thinking that builds genuine fluency from the inside out. If you enjoy today's episode, I would love for you to subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave us a review. More on that at the end. All right, let's begin. The universal experience. I want you to picture a scene. It might feel familiar. You sit down to do something important. Perhaps it's a work email you need to write. Perhaps it's a report that's been waiting on your desk for 3 days. Perhaps it's a phone call you've been meaning to make, or a project you genuinely care about but haven't touched in weeks. You sit down. You open your laptop. You look at the screen. And then you spend 20 minutes staring at that email without typing a single word. Or perhaps your version looks more like this. You suddenly notice that the kitchen is desperately in need of a clean. The bookshelf. When did that become so disorganized? You should really sort those books. Alphabetically. By genre. Actually by color. That would look wonderful. And while you're at it, perhaps this is the perfect moment to rearrange the furniture. The task is still there, waiting. But somehow, the bookshelf feels more urgent. Or maybe this. You open a browser tab, intending to check just one thing. 45 minutes later, you've watched a documentary about deep-sea creatures, read 3 articles about a country you have no plans to visit, and found yourself in a comment section discussing a film you haven't seen. And then, the guilt arrives. That familiar, heavy feeling. You tell yourself, I am so lazy. Why can't I just do it? What is wrong with me? Sound familiar? If it does, I want to offer you something today. A different question. Not, why are we so lazy? But something more honest and more interesting. What if procrastination isn't a character flaw at all? What if the delay, the avoidance, the distraction, the endless postponement, what if all of that is actually your brain trying to protect you from something? That might sound strange right now, but by the end of this episode, I think you'll see it very differently. Reflection. When was the last time you delayed something you genuinely wanted to accomplish? Not something you were forced to do, but something you actually cared about. What did that delay feel? Your brain isn't working against you. Here is a question worth sitting with for a moment. What is your brain's primary job? Most of us would answer, to help me think, plan, and succeed. And those things are true, in part, but they're not the brain's primary job. The brain's primary job, the one it has been executing for hundreds of thousands of years, is survival. To protect you from threat, to avoid pain, discomfort, uncertainty, and loss. This is not a design flaw. It's extraordinary evolutionary engineering. It kept our ancestors alive in genuinely dangerous environments. But here's the problem. Your brain cannot always tell the difference between a real threat and a perceived threat. Between a lion in the grass, genuinely dangerous, and an email you're afraid to send, which is not dangerous at all, but which feels deeply uncomfortable. To your nervous system, uncertainty feels like danger. Vulnerability feels like exposure. The possibility of failure, of judgment, of not being good enough. These things activate the same threat response mechanisms as physical danger. And when the brain detects a threat, real or imagined, it does what it has always done. It tries to protect you. And one of the most effective ways to protect you from something uncomfortable is simply to make sure you never encounter it. This is why procrastination, at its psychological core, is not really about poor time management. Procrastination is emotional regulation. It is your brain's attempt to manage uncomfortable feelings, anxiety, self-doubt, fear, overwhelm, by avoiding the source of those feelings, by doing something else instead, by cleaning the kitchen, scrolling through your phone, reorganizing the bookshelf, by doing anything that provides immediate relief from the discomfort of beginning. Let me offer you a metaphor. Imagine your brain as an overprotective friend. This friend loves you deeply and wants you to feel safe, but this friend is also quite anxious. And whenever you talk about doing something bold or uncertain, something that might not go perfectly, your friend pulls you back. They say, "Are you sure? What if it goes wrong? What if you're not ready? What if you get hurt?" Your overprotective friend would rather keep you comfortable today than help you succeed 6 months from now. Not because they don't care about your future, but because comfort is immediate and future success is uncertain. And the brain, like that friend, chooses certainty over possibility. Neuroscience tells us that the brain responds very differently to immediate rewards and distant rewards. The limbic system, associated with emotional response, reacts strongly to what is happening right now. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational thinking and long-term planning, is slower, quieter, and in the short term, it is easily overridden by emotional urgency. When you're sitting at your desk trying to start something difficult, you are essentially watching two parts of your brain negotiate in real time. And in those early moments, when the friction of beginning feels highest, the emotional brain often wins. Not because it's smarter, but because it's louder. Reflection. If your brain's primary job is survival, not success, how might that change the way you think about procrastination? Instead of asking, "Why am I so lazy?" what if you asked, "What is my brain trying to protect me from right now?" The hidden emotions behind delay. So if procrastination is emotional regulation, if it's the brain's attempt to avoid discomfort, the obvious question becomes, what emotions are we actually avoiding? Here is what I want you to notice. We often think of procrastination as avoidance of a task, but more often, it is avoidance of a feeling. The task is not the real problem. The emotion that the task triggers, that is the real problem. Let me illustrate with some examples. Imagine someone who keeps putting off applying for a promotion. They tell themselves they're not quite ready yet. They need a little more experience. Maybe next year. But underneath that story, what's actually happening? Perhaps it's fear of failure, of trying and being told no. Perhaps it's fear of success, of getting the role and then being exposed as not good enough. Perhaps it's a quiet but powerful sense of self-doubt. Who am I to believe I deserve this? Or consider someone who has been saying for years they want to start their own business. They have ideas, passion, a notebook full of plans, but they never quite start. Every week, there's a reason. The timing isn't right, the market is uncertain, they need to do more research. Beneath all those reasons, there may be something much simpler. The fear that if they actually try and it fails, the dream itself will be destroyed. As long as they don't try, the dream remains safe, possible, untested. Sometimes we procrastinate to protect our self-image. As long as we haven't tried, we haven't failed. There is also perfectionism, a force that is frequently misunderstood as a high standard for quality. But psychologically, perfectionism is often a defense mechanism. The perfectionist delays not because they want things to be excellent, but because they believe that an imperfect result reflects on them as a person, on their intelligence, on their worth, and so they wait until they can do it perfectly. And since perfection is rarely possible, they wait indefinitely. And then there is shame, the quiet, corrosive sense that you have already waited too long, that you should have started months ago. Shame makes starting even harder, because beginning now means confronting the delay itself. And so the cycle compounds. Shame creates more avoidance, which creates more delay, which creates more shame. And there is overwhelm. The sensation of looking at a task so large, so complex, so impossibly demanding that the mind simply doesn't know where to begin. So it doesn't. In every one of these cases, the procrastination is not fundamentally about the task. The task is just the surface. Beneath it, there is always an emotion that feels too uncomfortable to face directly. And this is precisely why so many productivity systems fail. They address the surface. They don't touch what's underneath. Reflection. Think of something you have been putting off for a long time. Be honest with yourself. What emotion is underneath the delay? Is it fear of failure? Fear of judgment? Shame? Perfectionism? You don't have to say it out loud, but try to name it, even quietly to yourself. What emotion are you postponing, not what task? The stories we tell ourselves. We all have an inner voice, a running commentary that narrates our experience, interprets events, and tells us who we are and what we're capable of. When it comes to procrastination, that inner voice can be remarkably creative. I'm not ready yet. Sounds responsible, even wise, and sometimes it's true, but very often, not ready is simply another word for afraid. I'll do it tomorrow. And tomorrow becomes next week, and next week becomes someday, and someday has a habit of never arriving. I work best under pressure. Perhaps the most popular story. For some people, in some situations, it contains a kernel of truth. But more often, it's a story we've told ourselves so many times that it has started to feel like a fact. It gives us permission to delay, and frames that delay as strategy rather than avoidance. I need more information before I can begin. And so we research, we read, we watch videos, take online courses, attend webinars. We prepare and prepare and prepare. But at a certain point, preparation becomes a substitute for action. Gathering information feels productive, and feeling productive is much more comfortable than actually beginning. These internal narratives are not random. They serve a purpose. They allow us to maintain a positive self-image while continuing to avoid. They explain, justify, and rationalize the delay in ways that feel logical, reasonable, and even virtuous. But they also keep us stuck. Psychologists call some of these patterns cognitive biases, systematic errors in thinking that distort our perception and judgment. When we tell ourselves we work best under pressure, we are exhibiting a bias. We are selecting the memories that confirm this story and quietly ignoring the times when pressure led to rushed, regrettable results. When we say we're not ready, we are creating what psychologists call a self-fulfilling prophecy. We believe we're not ready, so we don't begin. Because we don't begin, we never develop the readiness that can only come from doing. And so we confirm the original belief. Your internal dialogue is like the soundtrack playing beneath your life. You may not always notice it, but it shapes every single scene. And here is the difficult truth. The voice that tells you you're not ready, that you need more time, that tomorrow would be better, that voice often sounds like wisdom. But very often, it is simply fear dressed up in very convincing language. One of the most useful questions you can ask when you notice this inner voice is simply, is this thought helping me move forward, or is it protecting me from discomfort? These are not always the same thing, and learning to tell the difference is one of the most valuable skills you can develop, in English and in life. Reflection. If someone else spoke to you the way you sometimes speak to yourself, during moments of self-doubt, avoidance, and delay, would you find that person encouraging or exhausting? What would it feel like to speak to yourself the way you would speak to someone you genuinely love and believe in? Why comfort is so addictive. Let's be honest about the world we live in, because it matters enormously to this conversation. Procrastination has always existed. The ancient Greeks had a word for it, akrasia. Acting against your own better judgment, choosing immediate pleasure over long-term good. The philosopher Seneca wrote about the danger of postponing life. This is not a modern invention, but something has changed significantly in the last 2 decades. We now live in what many scholars describe as the attention economy, a world in which the most valuable commodity is not oil, gold, or money, but human attention. Technology companies employ some of the most sophisticated engineers and behavioral scientists in the world, and their singular purpose is to capture your attention and hold it for as long as possible. Every notification, every infinite scroll, every like, every autoplay, every algorithm that learns your preferences and serves you more of what you want. All of it is designed to keep you engaged and coming back for more. And it works, because all of these things trigger dopamine. Each notification, each new post, each unexpected piece of content, these create small bursts of pleasure. And the brain, which is wired to seek pleasure and avoid pain, learns quickly. The phone is pleasurable. The difficult task is uncomfortable. So when you are sitting with the mental friction of beginning something hard, the phone offers a far more attractive alternative. This is what researchers call the dopamine loop, the cycle of stimulus and reward that can pull our attention away from what we intend to do and into an endless series of small pleasures, each one individually insignificant, together deeply consuming. And what makes this particularly worth understanding is that none of it happens by accident. The experience of scrolling, the effortless movement, the continuous small reward of novelty is the product of deliberate, sophisticated design. These platforms are optimized for engagement, and your attention in this equation is the product being harvested. I am not saying that technology is simply bad. Connection, creativity, information, community, these things are real and valuable. But it is worth being honest about the tension between what these platforms offer: immediate comfort, stimulation, distraction, and what a meaningful life often requires: sustained attention, patience, and a willingness to sit with difficulty. Immediate comfort and long-term fulfillment are not always the same destination. And the question worth sitting with is this: how often are you choosing comfort without consciously deciding to? Not choosing it deliberately as a real and valid rest, but drifting into it, pulled by design, without ever quite noticing that a choice was being made. Reflection. Think of a day last week when you were significantly distracted by your phone or other digital content. Can you identify the specific moment when you drifted away from what you'd intended to do? Was it a conscious choice? Or did it simply happen? Building a better relationship with yourself. We have explored why procrastination happens: the neuroscience, the emotions, the stories, the modern environment. Now I want to shift slightly, because understanding why is important, but understanding alone doesn't change behavior. So what does? I want to begin by gently pushing back against the most common approach to procrastination: force. The idea that we need to discipline ourselves more rigorously, push harder, be stricter. This approach is understandable, and sometimes, in small doses, it works in the short term. But here is what the research actually shows. Self-criticism and shame are remarkably poor motivators for lasting change. When we feel bad about ourselves, we tend to do one of two things. We either push forward on a brief surge of guilt-driven energy, which typically fades quickly, or we retreat further into avoidance, because the self-criticism itself becomes something else uncomfortable to escape. There is a concept in psychology called self-compassion, the practice of treating yourself with the same kindness, understanding, and patience you would offer to a good friend who was struggling. And study after study has shown that self-compassion is not self-indulgence or lowering your standards. Quite the opposite. People who practice self-compassion tend to be more motivated, more resilient, and less paralyzed by shame. What might this look like in practice? Instead of saying to yourself, "I am so lazy. I never finish anything. I am hopeless," you might try, "This is genuinely difficult. A lot of people struggle with this. What is one small thing I could do right now?" Notice the difference. The first approach attacks the self. The second acknowledges the difficulty without adding unnecessary judgment. The first closes down possibility. The second opens a small door. Another powerful idea is what behavioral psychologists call reducing mental friction. The simple principle that we are far more likely to do things when they are easy to begin. If you want to read more, leave a book on your desk rather than across the room. If you want to exercise, lay your clothes out the night before. If you want to write, open the document before you go to bed so it's waiting for you in the morning. None of these ideas are revolutionary, but they work because they lower the barrier to entry. They reduce the activation energy required to begin. And perhaps the most important reframe of all: progress over perfection. The idea that something done imperfectly is infinitely more valuable than something planned perfectly but never started. You do not have to be magnificent today. You just have to take one honest step, and then another. Reflection. What would it actually feel like to respond to your own procrastination with curiosity and kindness, rather than frustration and self-criticism? Is that possible for you right now? If it feels impossible, what makes it feel that way? Small actions change identity. I want to share an insight that I find genuinely exciting, and I hope you will too. Most of us approach the question of motivation backwards. We tell ourselves, When I feel motivated, I'll start. When I feel inspired, I'll begin. When I feel ready, I'll act. But motivation, it turns out, very often doesn't arrive first. It arrives second, or third, or sometimes not until you're already well into the thing you were waiting to feel motivated for. Action, for many people and in many situations, creates motivation, not the other way around. This is well supported by research in behavioral psychology. When we begin, even reluctantly, even imperfectly, even for just 5 minutes, something shifts. The resistance softens. The brain begins to engage with the task. The emotional brain, which was insisting on comfort a moment ago, quiets slightly as the cognitive brain gets involved. The beginning creates momentum, and momentum makes continuing easier than stopping. But there is another layer to this that goes even deeper. It comes from thinking about identity, specifically the story you tell yourself about who you are. Here is the insight. Every small action you take is, in a sense, a vote for the person you are becoming. Every time you sit down to study, even for 15 minutes, you cast a vote for being someone who takes their learning seriously. Every time you begin a task, despite feeling reluctant, you cast a vote for being someone who acts with intention. No single vote wins an election, but accumulated votes shape the outcome. You don't become fluent in English because of one extraordinary session. You become fluent through hundreds of ordinary ones. You don't become a person who finishes things through one heroic burst of effort. You become that person through the accumulation of small, consistent, unspectacular choices, each one quietly reinforcing the identity you are building. The identity doesn't have to be fully formed before you begin acting on it. You don't need to feel like a writer before you write. You don't need to feel like a runner before you run. You act your way into the identity, and the identity follows the action. Begin with the smallest possible version, not the full essay, one sentence, not the entire workout, one stretch, not the complete report, one paragraph, not a full study session, 5 minutes with a podcast, and then do it again tomorrow. Transformation doesn't usually arrive dramatically. It arrives quietly, through the accumulation of small decisions that no one may notice except you. Reflection. Who are you becoming through the small decisions you repeat every day? This week, not theoretically but in practice, what identity are your daily actions voting for? Is it the identity you actually want? A different conversation with your brain. We have covered a great deal of ground today. Let me bring everything together. We started with that deeply familiar experience, the staring at screens, the kitchen cleaning, the endless postponing, and we asked a different question. Not, what's wrong with me, but what might my brain actually be trying to do? We explored the neuroscience, the tension between the emotional brain and the rational brain, the preference for immediate comfort over uncertain future reward, the way the brain interprets discomfort as danger and delay as protection. We looked beneath the surface of delay and found the real architecture: fear of failure, fear of success, perfectionism, shame, overwhelm. And we saw that what we are often procrastinating is not a task, but a feeling. We examined the stories our inner voice tells, the sophisticated internal narratives that make avoidance sound like wisdom, that frame delay as caution, that keep us simultaneously comfortable and stuck. We talked honestly about the world we inhabit, an attention economy architected to pull us toward effortless pleasure and away from meaningful difficulty. And we asked how often we are choosing comfort without truly choosing it. And we turned toward something gentler. The idea that lasting change doesn't require self-punishment, that self-compassion is not weakness. It is, in fact, one of the most effective psychological tools we have. That small, consistent actions change not just what we do, but the story we tell about who we are. So here is my invitation: not to declare war on procrastination, not to overhaul your entire life, not to wake up tomorrow with a perfect system. My invitation is something far quieter than that. The next time you catch yourself saying, "I'll do it later," pause. Not to criticize yourself, not to begin a long internal lecture about your failings, but to pause with a little curiosity, to ask, what am I protecting myself from right now? And then, gently, without any requirement that the answer be impressive or the action be large, what is one small step I could take, right now, in this moment, not to solve everything, but simply to begin? Because beginning is the thing. Beginning is almost always the hardest part. And once you have begun, even imperfectly, even reluctantly, you have already changed the story. You have cast a vote for the person you are becoming. Growth doesn't always arrive with a burst of motivation. More often, it begins quietly, in an ordinary moment, on an ordinary day, with a single decision to listen to yourself differently. And that decision is available to you right now. Before we close today, I want to take a genuine moment to thank you for being here. Listening to a podcast in a language you're still developing takes real concentration, real courage, and real commitment. The fact that you stayed with this episode, through 8 full sections of advanced vocabulary, complex ideas, and thoughtful reflection, tells me something important about you. You are the kind of learner who takes this seriously, and that is something to feel good about. I hope today's episode gave you more than just language practice, although I hope it gave you that too. I hope it offered something to genuinely think about, something that might make the next time you notice yourself procrastinating feel a little less like a personal failure and a little more like an invitation to understand yourself more deeply. Now, before you go, I have a very small but genuinely important request, and I want to be honest with you about why it matters. Code Your English is a podcast built on a simple belief that advanced English learners deserve content that actually challenges them. Content that engages with real ideas, introduces sophisticated vocabulary in meaningful context, and treats listeners as the intelligent, capable people they are. Every episode of this show is crafted with care, research, and real respect for your time and intelligence. But podcasts grow through you, through listeners who share episodes, leave reviews, and tell their friends. So if this episode resonated with you, if it made you think, if it introduced vocabulary you found genuinely useful, if it offered a perspective that felt worth sitting with, please take just 1 minute to do one of these things. Subscribe to Code Your English wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss a new episode. Leave a review, even just 2 or 3 sentences, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you found us. Reviews help new listeners discover the show, and each one makes a real difference. Share this episode with someone who might need it. A colleague who always says they'll start next week. A friend who keeps talking about beginning something but never quite does. A language partner who would appreciate this kind of thoughtful content. You are part of what makes Code Your English possible, and your support, your reviews, your shares, your presence in this community is what allows this podcast to keep reaching learners all over the world who are working to grow, not just in English, but in life. Thank you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. Until next time, be kind to yourself. Take your next small step and keep coding your English. Goodbye for now.